Well, welcome everyone. I want to say thank you to everyone that's live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Zoom. We're going to have a great time tonight. And it's really a pleasure that you all are here to discuss a topic that I think it's on everybody's mind right now. Why is it that when I want to bring up a new idea, somebody says, we just don't do things that way, right? We're familiar with that, aren't we? Or is it a time where we're focusing too much on diversity and not inclusion, and we just see others as other? Or perhaps it's the way that we're operating in the workplace right now. Too siloed, disconnected thinking, not really knowing and seeing people as humans. Or perhaps we're just tired of how the brand is controlling how we think and we act, when the most powerful brands that we can rely on are our individual identities. Or perhaps it's this focus on the mission. I mean, after and during the pandemic and social unrest, people are changing their mission statements, their values. To what? To what is politically correct, or to a way that allows us to contribute more effectively as individuals? Or how about results? I mean, aren't we all tired of the pre-prescribed approach to how we handle results? Well, of course we are. And that's why we've reached a time now that it's not so predictable that we need to experiment and explore. These are just some of the things that we'll talk about this evening. Now, remember, we've got GLLG staff online. And so submit your questions on Zoom and in chat through LinkedIn, and let's have some fun. And we've got some audience members here that are going to be part of the conversation as well. And then when I'm done, I'll be sure to bring up my dear friend, Courtney Schroeder, who's going to come and talk a little bit about unleashing individuality, what's going on at General Mills, and some of his thought-provoking thoughts around the future of DE&I. So, unleashing individuality. Well, I'll tell you this. It is the leadership skill that unlocks all others. In fact, it's the most important skill that we can have. See, it's our responsibility to be able to see suppression while it's happening and then root it out by interrupting it and then pivoting from unleashing, or from suppressing to unleashing. Now, to put this all in context, I'd like for all of us to watch this video featuring Kayla Reddick. Let's have a look. Our first speaker, Kayla Reddick, is the founder of the Invincible movement. After experiencing the isolation and uniqueness of being a young adult cancer patient, she grew determined to change the experience for fellow patients and survivors. Kayla will share her story of being suppressed as an individual by the many doctors that evaluated her breast cancer diagnosis at the age of 24. What did that feel like?
It was really destabilizing, and honestly, it just added to the isolation that I was already feeling. You see, when you're diagnosed with cancer at 24, you no longer fit in with your normal peer group. And good luck trying to date when you're bald and you don't have breasts anymore. I mean, it just throws you for a complete loop. And then you don't fit in on the outside, and then you go on the inside, the hospital, the space where you're supposed to be welcome. And I was lumped in with everyone who was had the same diagnosis as me, and we were on the same treatment schedule, which means that I was lumped in with 50 and 60-year-old women because that's the type of cancer I had.
So you were lumped into a category.
Absolutely. And so not only did I not fit in on the outside, now I don't belong here in inside anymore, and that isolation is insidious.
So what's most understood about a young adult with cancer?
The most misunderstood thing is, when you're going through it, people's lives are just under the wave. But then when the active treatment ends, that's when everything gets so much worse. And we're so unprepared for this time called survivorship. And there's no resources, and you're just left to fend on your own. And I can tell you from personal experience that if you present these concerns, why am I struggling so much now that this is over, to your oncologist, it's possible that you'll get a response like I did that was, well, we saved your life. I don't really know what else you want from us. You need to move on. And that's the biggest misconception about cancer, is that it's so different than you break your arm, your bone heals, you get the cast off, and you get to move on with your life. This is something that will continue to impact me every day for the rest of the time. And when it starts at 24, it's a lot longer to live with than, 64.
Kayla, what is the one thing a hospital can change about their cancer centers?
I love the example of case managers for drug and alcohol addictions. So funny enough, these were implemented because insurance companies were so tired of people paying for, or having to pay for so many people relapsing, because when they got into the outside world, all those little things that you have to deal with from being a person derailed their recovery. Yet I'm supposed to just be able to figure out how to cope with them on my own. And I understand relapse looks different for a cancer patient than it does a drug addict. However, I will say that I never had any suicidal thoughts before cancer. I never had any panic issues before cancer. And I think that that has to be a relapse of some kind in itself.
Kayla, what's the lesson here? I mean, what do healthcare systems need to do to prepare themselves for young adults with chronic diseases?
I think we just need to consider that this is a person coming in instead of a patient, and just looking at, whatever bullet points are on my diagnostic sheet, and just some more dimensions to who I am as a person. Spend some time with me, develop who I am. I sort of demanded to get to be myself in this setting, and therefore I felt more comfortable. And I had a positive experience at this particular hospital, and I think that just isn't the norm. And so I think the more we can really see patients as people, and then of course think about this whole perspective care.
Yeah, it's interesting. Pete told me earlier that he wanted to stop being viewed as a product, but as a student. And it sounds like exactly what you're saying. It says, don't see me as a patient, see me as an individual. Healthcare, corporate, higher education. We're all solving for the same things, just packaged differently. See, what Kayla just showed you is how we as employees are treated by our leaders. Just move on. You got a job. Don't complain. We got this. Or a faculty member who says, look, I gave you a passing grade. It's time for you to just listen and let me set the course for you. What's the point? Is that we unleash individuality the wrong way, because there's so many different ways that we unconsciously suppress individuals. And this begins at school, when we're told that we have to have the one right answer, choose a major or follow a predetermined path. And then it extends into the workplace, where you have to follow these rigid guidelines in ways of doing things to get hired, and then try to navigate how you go up the ladder. And then, as Kayla just showed us, it extends into how we're treated as patients when we're fighting for our lives. See, as a kid, had a younger brother or older brother, and Eric was a good guy. He had really good intentions, but he had very strong opinions about what would make me worthy for his respect in return. He said to me, you have to go get an MBA. You have to go to a big school. You have to go have a big corporate job. And he did that, and he went up the ladder and was very successful at many global organizations. In fact, many people follow that advice too. And I tried to do that. In fact, I pursued that. But see, my accomplishments in work and at school were of a different sort. See, I didn't do very well at test. In fact, I was on academic probation for quite a while in my first and second years, and figured it out and got a B average from UCLA. But see, my accomplishments, I wasn't one to be measured by tests or grades. See, I was the one that was leading the academic groups and leadership councils. I was the one that was selected as a peer health counselor, in fact, certified by the UCLA Medical Center, the only one who didn't have a degree in biology or a major in biology and kinesiology. And when I graduated, I was one of 20 people who was a senior spotlight in my graduating class for my leadership in work in crisis prevention. But after I graduated, what happened? Well, I got that corporate job in the food and beverage industry. And then I find myself being an executive at the ripe age of 25 years old. But didn't feel right. I mean, for me, I had this entrepreneurial spirit that didn't make me feel as if I can fit into that highly standardized environment. So what did I do? I started a food business. Years later, sold it for a profit. But I still felt like a bit of an outsider. Why? Well, yes, I was successful at doing things using my own standards, but I didn't meet the standards set by my brother. See, I've been working with corporations now for nearly 17 years, guiding them to ensure that they break free from the standardization traps. Why? Because when you follow somebody else's standard, you feel that you can't be successful on your own. So let's do something I didn't plan for. I'm curious, how many of you have felt suppressed by someone else's standards? How many of you have felt suppressed by someone else's standards? Now, was this at school? Was it at work? How did it make you feel? Courtney, how did it make you feel? Let's get him a mic, Sandy.
Well, I think when you suppress yourself, you lose a piece of yourself, right? So it's really hard to give or contribute everything that you have or those ideas. You kind of hold back because you're trying to fit some kind of mold or some kind of view that you think others are supposed to have of this. So,
thank you, Courtney. It's okay, you could hold on to that. See, this is part of what I've been trying to figure out for years. In fact, this journey is extraordinarily personal for me, is I've learned the hard way to realize just how much our life experiences are controlled by standards that we never had a voice in crafting and actually never felt that we had the ability to challenge. Think about that. Never felt like we had the ability to challenge. So I want to share with you this great quote by Donna Hicks. She's an expert at human dignity and specialist in conflict resolution. And she shared just what a major obstacle there is today in human relations, that we have failed to recognize how vulnerable people really are in our ways in which we treat them as if they didn't matter. Think about that. As if they didn't matter. See, Kayla felt like she didn't matter. I have felt like I didn't matter. We all feel like we don't matter when our individuality is suppressed. But here's the good news. We need to start embracing some fundamental non-negotiable opportunities. And what are they? That we have value, that we want to be included, that we are worthy, that we want to be seen in our full humanity, that we are unique, that we want to be ourselves, that we have experience and insight, and we want to explore possibilities, and that we have ideas. And we want to do more. We want to do more. And it's just so painful to think just how much we hold ourselves and others back. But it's also freeing to know that we can unleash ourselves and each other. In fact, let me share a very personal story with you. In January of 2021, as I was writing the book, Unleashing Individuality, I realized that I was a workaholic. And I checked myself into a wellness center. And I wanted to answer 3 questions. Number 1, how do I disconnect? 2, how can I care less? And finally, how can I last another 30 to 35 quality years with my 7-year-old daughter and my incredible wife? Here are the answers. How do you disconnect? By connecting more with yourself. How do you care more? By caring more. How do you care less? You care more about yourself. And how do I last another 30 to 35 years? I got to be consistent in doing those two things. And I've done that. I saved my life, or at least I saved myself from a heart attack. And I can remember as I was leaving that last day, they gave me a snow globe. And they said, Glenn, shake this snow globe as fast as you can, as hard as you can. As I was watching those little flakes in that snow globe, he said to me, this is what your mind has looked like for the past 30 years. I bet yours too. And as the snow globe began to clear, he said, this is the clarity that you need, ironically enough, to unleash yourself. To unleash yourself. So, what are we doing? Are we truly unleashing ourselves, or are we allowing standardization to control us? What's happening here? See, a very dear friend of mine from UCLA, he was in law school when he found out that you could actually make money listening to music. He had heard about this job called an A&R rep, which stands for artist in repertoire. And he could remember just how he felt when people talked about A&R. His pulse would quicken, his vision would be more vibrant. He just knew that he was meant to be an A&R rep. He knew that there was one single way to get there, and it was to be an executive to a record label executive. So when he was in law school, he became an intern at MCA Records in Los Angeles, and he asked every single executive if he could be their assistant. And what did they say? No. Why? Because he was a lawyer. They thought that he wasn't creative, and he was the kind of person that was out to get their job. But he knew, he had one of those moments where he just knew that this can't be possible. I'm meant for this, though I don't have the experience, I don't have the network, but he just knew. My question to you is, have you ever just known that you were made to do something in your career? You know how much resistance I got from my brother and others who saw me as this rising corporate executive, and then I pivoted to something that I knew that I was made for? And thank goodness I have a wife that believes in me and constantly tells me, this is what you were made for. How many people tell you that? But no, you have to follow this predetermined script and standards that maybe you don't meet, much like Jeff. Now, Jeff has a very fascinating story, and I write all about it in the book, Unleashing Individuality. But here's the short version. He figured another way in. He figured another way in. And what did he do? Well, he fought suppression to become a music journalist at Billboard magazine. And then he fought more suppression to convert his journalistic success into his first A&R job. And then he fought more suppression, if you could believe this, to convince people that he knew how to spot talent, great talent. You know Jeff's first acts that he signed? Maybe these sound familiar. Macy Gray, Limp Bizkit, Korn, Linkin Park. See, one might say today that Jeff has the right resume. He's a multi-platinum A&R executive and manager whose acts have sold over 100 million albums. Now, this is not a story about how one individual bucked the system. No. This is about how do we modernize our systems to make it work for everyone. So let's do this. How about if I reverse engineer the story for you? See, the people in charge didn't want to let him in. They saw him in a very limiting way, as being non-creative and someone that was out to get their job. And they also had assumptions about the group that he was identified with, lawyers, and people had strong opinions about those people in that group. Also, the people who were in charge saw who he can be in a very limited way. And then, of course, there was only one way to become an A&R rep: become someone's assistant, But see, those standards were actually created by someone long ago. So it actually made it more difficult for Jeff to do what he wanted to do and how he could get to where he wanted to go. See, what I've just described to you are the 5 indicators of individuality. And they span the spectrum from who you let in, how you see them, who you let them be, what you let them do, and how you let them do it. See, this is a way we break down individuality into its component parts. This is what we can actually measure. This is what we can actually measure. Think about that. How many times did you feel like someone should see who you are and let you in? Or were they just bringing people from the past because that's how it works? But this experience that Jeff has, it's a very common experience. I mean, it's one that we all face as we're trying to go up the ladder. A ladder of success that has already been predefined for you, rather than one that we define ourselves. See, sometimes this suppression that we feel is deliberate. But I got news for you. Oftentimes, it's not. Why? Because, see, we have accepted the standards. And we've actually adapted to those standards rather than question them or even challenge them. See, this is why we need to create a new habit of continuously evaluating when and how and where old, outdated standards are suppressing people. See, my firm's director of marketing and strategy, his name is Guillermo. In fact, he's the producer of tonight's event. And Guillermo challenges me to reshape my thinking. He's the one that challenges me to make sure that I'm not falling into the standardization traps. And he's such an impressive young man. And he's helped me to unleash myself to a whole other level. And now we unleash each other. But guess what? This actually happens from Brazil. And it's not in one location. He's constantly on the move, traveling, surfing, doing what he needs to do in his personal life to feel as if he can fully deliver his capacity in the workplace. Now, that means that if I had him work in a specific location or do the work the way I do it, he wouldn't accept it, and I would be the one to lose. See, we're living at a time now where we have to respect what I call someone's lifestyle-driven career. And that's what Guillermo has done. He's created a lifestyle-driven career. In fact, his career has been so incredible. I mean, he's such a talented guy. And now he has a team in Brazil that does all of this incredible marketing and production for GLLG out of Brazil. Was that even comprehensible 5-10 years ago? But what he does and how he manages his life and his career reminds me of this powerful quote from Hungarian-American psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, that the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, and relaxing times. That the best moments in our lives is when we push our bodies and minds to its limit in a voluntary effort to achieve something that's difficult and worthwhile. Are we truly living the best moments of our life right now? I mean, think about that. Or again, are we allowing old, outdated standards? You know, this is the way we do things to help you become happy and live a fulfilling and meaningful life. See, I've learned that unleashing individuality can only happen if we really understand the barriers that we're facing. So what I'm going to do is share what I believe are, and what I've seen in our research, the two most common barriers for each of the 5 indicators of individuality. Here they are. Who you let in. We don't let in outsiders, and we don't seek new or contrary voices. How you see them. We see people in narrowly defined ways, and we make assumptions about their group identity. Who you let them be. Listen to this one. We don't update how we see people as they evolve, and we set their path and course for them. Think about that. We don't update the way we see people evolve, and we set the course for them. And how you let them do it? We hold people to old, outdated standards, and we actually dictate how they do work, the language that they have to use to be accepted. You see what's happening here? I mean, we're suppressing people without even knowing it. In fact, all of us have been suppressed for years. Why? Because we don't feel safe to be and share ourselves. So what are the consequences? I mean, what are the consequences if we don't unleash our individuality? Well, there's 2 of them. One is that we will continue to inadvertently keep people functioning far below their full capacity. And according to my organization's research, we're lucky if we're at 40%. Lucky if we're at 40%. Why? Because we get to do what we don't like to do because of the box that we've been given to play in. Very simple. I'm sure there's many times that you've wanted to have a say in another department's decisions or in something that maybe one of your colleagues are working on, but no, you stay in that box. And number 2 is that we will continue to fail to see and support each other's dignity. Each other's dignity. I mean, let me ask you this question. Do your experiences at work make you feel thrilled and purposeful? I mean, do they? Does your work feel purposeful and thrilling? Well, let me answer that for you. That most people will tell you that once their ideas get shot down because we just don't do things that way, we feel as if someone's stripping our capacity to do anything, our dignity. So what do we do? How do we fix this? Like, how do we begin to create an environment to truly unleash people's full capacity? Because think about this. For years, we've been saying, be your authentic self. For years, we've been saying, we want you to operate at your full capacity, your full potential. And you know what? We do those things for as far as our standards allow us to. It's much like what Kayla said. I mean, in the end, we're not patient-centered. We're not consumer-centered. We're not employee-centered. We're not student-centered. We are for as much as our standards allow us to. Are we beginning to understand? So, how do we do this? Well, if we suppress by not bringing outsiders in, then when we must unleash with inclusive working and diverse thinking. Now, if we suppress by seeing people in narrowly defined ways, then we must unleash by seeing people out and well beyond their confined roles as experts with impact. Now, if we suppress by not letting people explore opportunities, then we must unleash by creating them and working with them to see them. Let them explore and expand. If we suppress by holding people to outdated standards, then we must unleash by not allowing them, I should say, to be immune by those standards. Let them be immune by those standards. Have them create and modernize another way of doing things. See, when we elevate, activate, realize, and exceed our full capacity, now we can contribute at our highest level. And you know when we reach our highest level? When we feel purposeful and thrilling. But it's so inconsistent in all the mind games that are played. It feels depressing, not satisfying at all. Let me ask you this. How can we fully unleash individuality if we ignore the second part of this equation, which is this, that we need to begin to understand just how important it is for people to see and know that they matter? When's the last time someone said that you matter? Would they even know how to measure that? No, because one thing that we do really well, and I say this respectfully, is that we use words that we don't even know how to measure. And we're having a very practical conversation right now that is extraordinarily measurable. I mean, we all want to be treated like human beings, don't we? I mean, you might be thinking, well, Glenn, of course we do. There's nothing new with that. I treat people as humans. I'm not disrespectful. Well, guess what? You know what I've learned? And Kayla helped us understand this too, that we are not fully supported. Our dignity is not fully supported in our workplaces, in doctors' offices, and not even in schools. And it's not because people intentionally are trying to be disrespectful. It's just that we suppress individuality unconsciously. Think about that. Unconsciously. Well, when you're so wired into the standards, of course it's unconscious. You don't even know that you're doing it to other people and that they're doing it to you. So how do we change this? How do we begin to restore our dignity? Well, if we suppress by not seeking new and contrary voices, well, we must unleash through investigative listening. If we suppress by making assumptions about people and the groups that they identify with, well, we must unleash by seeing beyond one's group identity and who they are as a whole person. Right? If we unleash or suppress by making people have to assimilate, well, then we must unleash by allowing them to feel safe to be and share themselves. If we suppress by dictating and controlling the path forward for them, then we must unleash by allowing people the freedom to stray. And if we suppress by dictating how they work, then we must unleash by trusting others to do things in their own way. We've reached a very precarious moment, haven't we? We've made a lot of big promises and changes during the social unrest and pandemic. And the question is whether or not we can sustain those promises and fulfill those changes. But that's only possible based upon what we decide to do from this point forward. And that means having the right systems, incentives, and rewards to know people, respect them for who they are, and giving them the room to feel safe, to be and share themselves without fear of consequences. So let's unleash each other. The future demands it, and the next generation will expect it. Thank you very much, guys. I'd like to take some questions. How'd you feel, Alyssa, as you were hearing that tonight?
You're really fascinated.
Let's get the mic, please.
It really resonated with me. I think I've been reflecting, upon this last period of time and all of the change that I think has been around us. And I think in a lot of ways, because there has been so much change in our environment, it's actually a time where I've felt more able to be myself, or more able to stretch myself, to try new things, to do things differently, because the environment has yielded that. And so I think it's really interesting for me to think about, like, how do we carry that forward, right? And how do we kind of not settle back into a structure that is the standardization and that kind of boxes in the way that we do things? And how do we kind of keep that spirit of change and progressiveness and a new way of doing things alive as we transition into the future? So it was really powerful for me to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me give you some insight, if I may.
Yeah.
So we've learned that, early in career are really struggling with this because they know the truth. They know the truth. They know what's going on, but they also know, they're starting to realize, I should say, but in some organizations, they know that they're feeling that way because their managers and leaders are feeling that way. And if you talk to those leaders, managers, and leaders, they're feeling that way too. And if you can go up the ladder, you'll find that everybody is feeling and thinking the exact same thing. But this is what gives me hope, is that those early in career now realize that if they don't interrupt and pivot, because they've assessed, they don't interrupt and pivot, then they're the ones going to be letting down the next generation. So for them, it's not about what's another opportunity out in the marketplace. It's how can I create the path moving forward? Because if I don't, then I'm just doing what everybody else did to me. That's hopeful. Frank, thoughts?
So I agree. People are being suppressed. I think the challenge is if you don't know how to get out of that framework, how do you interrupt it? So it's really interesting. I wrote an observation that I had before you alluded to this, and it was that I felt like I was being boxed in, but I didn't feel like the person that was doing it was intentionally doing it. I felt like it was unconscious. And I was having a conversation with my mentor today, and he was saying, I know this person. He's a really good dude. And he is, but I don't think he knows how to operate differently, how to operate outside that standardization. And I think that's the real challenge for individuals, communities, cultures. I think about a childhood book that I think calls this out really poignantly without many words. It's the Sneetches, right? And it was all about this group of creatures that had the same emblem on their bodies. And they couldn't see themselves differently until one person decided, I'm going to take this thing off. And then it caught like a wildfire. But I think until you get someone, either in your organization, your team, or otherwise, to be able to step outside of that framework and see themselves differently, and therefore, by extension, being able to see others differently, you don't create this kind of domino effect.
And you know what, Frank, you're right. And so let me validate this. Number one is it takes someone to get out of that box. And when someone does it, then other people will follow. The problem is most people are afraid. Afraid of what? The consequences. Oh, that one turned on us. Doesn't meet the standard. Doesn't meet the predetermined, profile of an individual that will go up the ladder. Check. That's the fear. You know what I found out a couple of weeks ago, and excuse my ignorance, that the very doctors that treat us, they're not asked to be high in EQ, emotional intelligence. They're paid to practice a skill, surgery, treating patients at a time where the very patients themselves feel suppressed about the way the system treats them. And I'm not even talking about diverse populations. Can you imagine that? You talk about an industry that needs to evolve. It's healthcare. The irony is They've been talking patient centricity for years, but the very people that are supposed to practice that maybe practice it through their skill, but don't practice it in how they communicate and engage with individuals. Guess what? Same thing in higher ed. So the whole point is this is systemic throughout corporate America, healthcare, higher ed. It's a pretty big issue. So we got a lot of work to do, don't we? And I share this not to raise a flag of concern. It's to say we need to start acting, because you guys yourself, the folks that are watching us online, they've experienced all these things at work. But do we act on them? Or do we just let it go away because it might hurt us when what we're doing is actually being the enablers of it to spread? See, that's why not everybody today, in my mind, is qualified to be a leader. It takes totally different skills now to be a leader. And this is the leadership skill that unlocks all others. And it's the one that most leaders, not all, most leaders don't even know what to do with. And yet we're focusing now on what are the big issues: DE&I and ESG, environment, social, and governance. I got to tell you something. I know a few people in the board, they're struggling. They're actually struggling with DEI. Not about DEI, but the people that are actually leading DEI. Because it's being led in many areas like it was 10 years ago, which, look, there's nothing wrong with how they were doing it, but we have to help them evolve. That's all of us. You see the point? Sometimes we start celebrating too much of the standards that we are measured by when it may indeed not solve for the right things. What do you think, Todd? Is this resonating with you? One more, and then I'm going to bring Courtney up.
It is resonating, and thanks, Glenn, for coming and sharing. I think a couple of things that I wrote down as I was reflecting back on the pivots that I've made in my life. Many of those came as a conflict to what I would almost call a gatekeeper. So there was someone that was standing in between me and my aspiration, and I needed to make a conscious effort to see beyond that, because they were trying to box me into one of those spaces that would have me in that standardization moment. That said, that took a lot of energy, took a lot of internal fortitude and things to get beyond that. And I just don't know where it came from, right? But I was able to find it, so I'm able to celebrate that in some ways today. But I found those moments where there was someone that was interrupting my aspiration and putting me into that box. And it wasn't always a manager. Sometimes it was just someone that was in between some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's a mentor. Sometimes it's different people that serve in my orbit that maybe even unintendedly kind of boxed me into a space where I needed to dig deep and to celebrate my own individuality first. And so I love the way you said, you have to invest in yourself so that you can then be of service to yourself
and others.
Invest in yourself and others.
Very good, Todd. Thank you. Well, I love to continue the conversation, and we will with our friend Courtney Schroeder. Let's play it. Courtney, come on up. Woo, man. Hey, Courtney.
Doing pretty good, Glenn.
So what do you think about the conversation? Where are we right now? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I say just, I love the lead in and just kind of how you framed up what we're about to talk about. And I actually think as we talk about, these 5 different aspects of individuality, for me, I just could not, in the top of my mind, I was just rethinking through every D&I framework or every way we talk about D&I in organizations. And while you're not being overtly talking about them, they were baked in. And I'll give you examples. So the first one about who you let in, right? And so in any organization that's worth its salt doing any basics around diversity, equity, inclusion, you're talking at a bare minimum about bias, right? You're talking about, people still have these very much, are they a culture fit? Adam Grant talked about the culture ad. There's conversations that have been happening for years, but we still on a very basic level have to kind of remind people, because it happens. Like, who are you letting in the organization? That next one. So I just kind of I want to go through a couple of these.
Actually, can I do something real
Let's
quick?
do it,
Let's
yeah.
talk about the who you let in.
Yeah.
One thing I'm concerned about right now, and again, I'm a realist and I'm an optimist, and this work around DE&I is so important. But when I really think about who you let in, it makes me wonder, are we just all practicing the inclusion illusion? Are we creating the illusion that we're being inclusive? I'm just going to throw some pebbles at you guys to think about. So before we continue, let me ask you this, Courtney. Environment or individual, right? So we asked a group of 72 executives, my organization, we asked, how do we start evolving so that people can unleash their individuality? And the selection was start with the environment. Do we deploy operational systems so that we can work more inclusively to accomplish our individual and business goals? Or do we start with the individual, where we activate their personalization to help them, find their full capacity and restore their dignity to accomplish their individual and business goals, or both? 65% said both. 20% said the environment, and 15% said the individual. What do you think, Courtney?
Yeah, I get why you have to do both. I actually, as I think about this, and even some of the questions that we've started talking about, there's always this tension between how do you create individual change and how, as an individual, find my individuality and create change, knowing that without systems change, I'm going to end up just bumping my head up against the wall, right? I'm going to bang my head against the wall, and no one wants to do that, because you can only do that for so long, right? You start doing that and you feel that, and it wears on you, and you all of a sudden, you give up, right? Because you're like, I just can't do this. It feels like too big of a fight. And so I always, as you think about it, you're talking some big change. That's the other piece of this. I don't think it should be lost on folks of like, the things you're talking about require deep change. You require different ways of operating. And so I don't know, it's a really good question, but I don't know how you can create one without the other. You got to be in mind, I would be one, you got to start on the environment, because the other piece is environment takes time, right? Like, we want to create overnight change, but honestly, I think any change that really creates that long lasting effect, I don't know, you need years, right? Like, if you think about change management and enterprises or organizations of the sizes we're talking about, you have to invest day in, day out for years at a time to actually create the sustainable change.
What was the message? Where's the mic? Steve, what did he just say? What is the magnitude of the moment?
Well, what I heard him say, what I'm thinking about when I'm hearing this question is, the environment is created by people. So if they don't buy in, it's not going to change. So you have to invest in the individual to be able to make those changes. And you have to listen to the individual. They think what changes need to be, and then maybe it's an amalgam of all those ideas, but that's how you're going to get the environment change, by each individual person leading that change.
So thank you, Steve. And we're going to get to that. What you just said is just what the magnitude is of the moment here. This is serious. I mean, this isn't even about solving for ourselves anymore. Truth is, it never really was. That's part of the issue. But to think that it requires both the environment and individual, you have to look deep within yourself. I'm just letting it sit for you guys to let it simmer. So let's start with this one, Courtney. How can leaders provide a safe environment where no one is judged for expressing their opinions and perspectives? And this is all about who you let in. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's one, there's a couple core concepts that I think a lot of people are becoming more familiar with. I think this concept of psychological safety, right? It's probably at the core of, figuring this out. But, if you get back to, say you have a leader who wants to be committed to thinking about how do I create that environment? What do I have to do? What are the behaviors? I'd actually ask some of the audience, because I know some of you actually live it and breathe it, but, at the basic level, you have people who still operate as leaders through fear, right? So there's always, these leaders who either I'm going to, impart fear by, I'm going to make sure I know more than you. I'm going to make sure my authority over you. Like, there's people who still operate in that mindset. So obviously you can already imagine that it's hard to bring that individuality. It's hard to express yourself if you have that fear environment. So one, how do you create an environment of psychological safety? By ridding it of that fear, right? I do think, what we still have people struggle with, and it's one that, the more you can actually get leaders to talk about aspects of their identity, of themselves, in ways that break the norm. And I think that's a lot as you start unpacking individuality. How do you get leaders to talk about and embrace this kind of storytelling method in a way that allows others to do the same, right? Like, I believe deeply in that, and it doesn't have to be, I'm going to give you everything about me, but it gives you pieces of myself that maybe show a little bit of that vulnerability. It creates space. It creates opportunity for you to do the same. And so it's little practices, I think, over time that do that. But the core of all this has to be, if I share this with you, if I give you this idea, is there going to be retribution, right? Is this going to end up, having you look at me in a different way? Is there going to be something that you hold against me over time? Because if any piece of that, so that you will hold back. That's back to the first question you asked me, right? I started my career in public accounting. And if you know public accountants, the first thing I did when I realized my wardrobe wasn't up to snuff, I went to Brooks Brothers, right? Because
Brooks Brothers.
You know why? Because that's what all the accountants wore. I had triple pleated pants, I had a nice button down. And you were worried about saying anything that made you feel like you weren't part of that group. That was the group norm, right? And so they didn't have to directly tell me that was the group norm. You picked up on it, and because you wanted to advance, you found mechanisms to fit in, right? And I think there's always those mechanisms where everyone wants to feel part of the group. And if you don't challenge those mechanisms, or if you don't create alternative mechanisms, people will revert to what they think they have to do to fit in. And for POC, for female, for all types of it, you will find mechanisms that the dominant majority or the majority group has certain behaviors and ways of acting.
Whew. That sounded exhausting. That was fantastic. See how much work this is? Oh, and we got to do the job. Let's not forget that. We got to do the job. I want to go back to something Steve said, that it starts with the individual. You know what I've learned? First of all, technically it should. Because we've learned that we've given reasons for people to leave, but we haven't created enough reasons for people to stay yet. But this requires leadership. You know where leaders are today? They're concerned more about their own obsolescence than creating future legacies. But just be real. They're more concerned about their own obsolescence than creating future legacies. I mean, guys, I'm not trying to make this more than what it is, but are we beginning to understand? That was just the first indicator of individuality, and that was exhausting. Thank you for being so real. I have to tell you that now I've had the good fortune of working with General Mills now for going on 7 years. And, people at General Mills believe in Courtney. You know why? Because he has their back. Because Courtney knows that that we as people of color, we're trying to prove ourselves just to get in. And then we have to assimilate, like you said, pleats, shoes, Brooks Brothers, no one tells you, but you got to do something. And we're trying to establish our own identity. Do you see the force multiplier here? I got news for you. That's now is not just with people of color, it's everyone. You know why I say that? Because those that are not from diverse backgrounds, people of color, they place a strategic bet on standardization. Again, just planting a little seed, a little pebble for you guys to think about. So can we go on?
Yes.
Cool. Oh, and by the way, let's not forget this about people of color. We have always in our lives been in survival reinvention mode. So all this change, if we really play true to who we are as individuals, this is nothing. Just remember that. Yes.
Can I add?
Of course. No, where's the mic? Let's get Andy in the conversation. By the way, this is our conversation. I like to let everybody know who's on Facebook, LinkedIn, Zoom. Be part of the conversation. Submit your questions. We got Sandy on standby with some questions, hopefully here. But I know you're there, and we appreciate you being here. And I also like to do a shout out to 3M for sponsoring our event tonight. So thank you, 3M. Andy.
So just to build on what Courtney's talking about, I work at General Mills, 25 years in July. My first 2 years, to Courtney's point, wasn't about my performance. It was about my appearance. And so if you think about the way we want people to show up and the way we recruit people for their differences, yet when they get there, we need you to assimilate. That is the oxymoron. And the question I continued to ask my manager was, you recruited me for a reason. I don't look like anybody in this room, not here tonight, obviously, but at the time, and I have a different way of growing up, different way of thinking, a different way I operate. Yet you're coming back to me and saying, no, you need to look like us. And so that was like, kind of like, all right, the aha one. But again, back to Courtney's point of being a champion, once you get through and they let you in, is you open the damn door for everybody. And that's what Courtney does for us at General Mills. And that's what he does for, ever since I've known him is we're in, we're going to party, and we're going to open the door and make sure that anybody who shows up and wants to be part of it is going to be there. And I think that that's the behavior that we want and what we say we want to do. We have to model that. And if we model that, that will unleash people to actually truly show up with who they are and not think that they need to look like me, they need to act like me. The best feedback I ever get is someone says, hey, look at him, you don't have to look like everybody else. And so I think that that is what each of us need to do as we talk about really unleashing individuals, is to pay it forward and just make sure that door never shuts and no one feels like, hey, I can't come in because they're keeping me at bay.
I love that, Andy. So I got one for you. And again, I say this respectfully, and notice how genuine Andy is. I've seen his journey firsthand, man. He's a special individual. Now, and I say this respectfully because I just want to prove a point, okay? He fell in, maybe he didn't fall in, but someone helped him just right now fall into the standardization trap. Modeling. See, modeling is intended to say, if Todd does it that way, if you do it that way, this is how you should do it. When the objective here is for us to discover our own way without worrying about modeling or shadowing someone else's way. I knew where you were going. Is that cool that I went there?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm unapologetically me. And so where more I was going with that is that I just show up as me.
No, I know you.
And so that's what you need to do, though. I know
Yes.
if you want everybody to show up as they truly are, don't be me, be you,
Exactly.
and it's okay.
Yeah, but and again, I'm just
I know.
trying to say a point is the words we use matter. And this is how things happen unconsciously. One of the biggest things I'm always asked, guys, and thank you for that, Andy, is give me specific examples. So I'm throwing them at you tonight. People need to hear the tangible, real examples. Todd, did you have something? Megan, did you want to jump in? Go ahead, Megan. Thank you, Andy, for that. That was awesome.
So one of the things you said that really stuck with me is the people who made a bet on standardization. And I think if you were one of those people, I'm not one of those people. If you're one of those people, you are confused, you're frustrated, and you don't know how to lead right now. And when I think about the last, call it a year, maybe 18 months, this has been, for me personally, the most free, liberating time because there are no standards. This is not hard because I don't have to assimilate. I don't have to do all the things you just said, plus do the job. I just have to do the job. So this is actually easier for me than it's been ever. So when I look at people who are like, oh my God, I'm so confused, I kind of feel bad for them, because I think for everybody else, this is, for me, it's been liberating. There are no norms and I love it.
But you know what happened, Megan? You were prepared for the opportunity. And most people, the opportunity is right in front of them. They don't even know it. And they don't know what to do about it. You knew what to do. That's why you're the truth seeker. That's her brand.
Clinton, if
Yeah,
I
go
could
on,
just
let's
real
go.
quick build on, because I think you mentioned earlier the moment we're in, and I think even we started, some of us, I think you can start feeling as offices reopen and then there's nudges to get back that like there is you can feel going back to the way it was before, right? Like you can already sense kind of the FaceTime piece. You can sense like you go all these pieces. And, if you think about what happened, the seismic shift that it took for us to accelerate how to work virtually, about what that's meant for so much talent of like, and what's going to end up getting us there in the long, because I do think that is, I think there's clearly a set of the employment, a set of people out there who will no longer go into an office. It's clear as day. Like and I also think it's clear as day that generationally there's going to be very large differences in expectations around what work looks like, and that we're here now and we have this huge opportunity to kind of get to it today versus what you kind of feel happening is, we had this opportunity and now we're going to slowly just kind of slide back into some old habits and get to this probably mediocre way of doing not either one very good, right? And so versus what could we really how can we use the principles you talk about to think about how to create the workplace at each individual? And that doesn't some people need to be in the office. You know why? Because some people, that is where they focus best. They want that, they need that connection. That's what works for them. But some people never want to go back. And we just are not good at finding ways to serve that individual. Like it's standardization to the core of we cannot individualize the office experience. And I don't know who's getting it right, but whoever does, I think will be able to attract talent and retain talent and grow talent in ways that their competition won't even be close to.
Hey, Courtney, so I feel so passionate about the backward slide. You know who's getting it wrong, in my opinion, is tech. And, when I think about technology before this, I viewed them as most innovative, most unleashing of individuals. This is where all the free thinking and the awesome ideas come from. And you watch them taking steps that I consider backwards, requiring people to be back in the office. I think Apple on the 23rd they expect everybody to be back in person. And of all industries, I thought that they would be the most progressive. So I actually think they're wrong. And I think there was a quote from a former Google CEO that was like, well, I don't know how you could possibly create collaboration without being in person. And I just thought what a just because you don't know how to do it means it therefore doesn't exist. And so I agree. I'm watching to see who gets it right. I'm very proud of the steps that General Mills is making. We're doing it more right than tech. And there was never a day that I thought that I would say that, but I think tech is getting it wrong.
I need the mic.
Please,
Okay.
you got it. It's yours.
I'm sorry. I really believe I just
Tesla, can you put it really close and talk louder, or tech team says it's.
Or something you can.
Okay, let's see here. Hello? I'm just gonna amplify what's being said here. Because I think the question becomes, as we go back to the office, is who are you and how do you work best, right? It's about the individual and how can I get you, to your point, to expand and explore in the way that you work best? So who are you and how do you work best? And I don't think it's necessarily everybody has to go back into the office, right? We have a new generation of people that work differently. You want to remain competitive, hire differently, do it in the way that people work best, right? And so I think to be competitive, to change with the times, and I've said this a couple of times to some of my teams, we're now different. 2 years later, we are different, and whoever doesn't understand that is not with the times. So, we can't go back, we need to go forward. And some organizations are going back.
And you know why? Because they are making us solve for many things at the same time. Culture, leadership effectiveness, trust, teamwork, retention, talent development, how we work, lead, and conduct business. And you have all these things in your mind. when all those things can be solved by just practicing these 5 indicators, simple. Because by the way, who you let it in, how you see them, who you let them be, what you let them do, how you let them do it, you know what it measures? It measures inclusion. That's the punchline, by the way. It measures inclusion. So anyway, you're right. Things are going to keep changing. Everybody just has, remember, let's just simplify transformation for a moment, because I want to get back to Courtney, because he's the man. We're all trying to serve a much more informed and knowledgeable individual, period. So, Courtney, let's get back to this as I tee up the next question. So, let's talk about how you see them. How can leaders make their employees feel seen, known, and welcomed as individuals?
Yeah, I think, well, this is a tough one. So, and I think the reason I'm saying it's a tough one, it's, I think it's very easy to, on a very surface level, to make anyone feel seen, welcome, heard. Like, it's very easy. Yeah, welcome to the team, you know, like, let's go grab some coffee, you know, like, but, you know, if you look at, and, you know, the underlying why team diversity and diverse teams and versus homogeneous teams will manage well are more likely to outperform them, there is a deeper understanding that leaders need to have about the why behind diversity. And we've talked about, like, it's like you have the basic McKinsey studies that are getting about to be 20 years old at this point, and they've been cited a million times. It'll tell you about board diversity, but the actual, like, raw science, and I know some of the folks in here study it for a living, and I appreciate that I'm talking in front of them, but the raw science behind why actual diversity on a range of scales and what diversity means in your own identity. That's why this piece around identity and all the aspects of identity that end up coloring each other almost like a kaleidoscope, because our identities influence and shape all the things we see. A genuine appreciation of that level of diversity and what it can mean for your team, what it can mean for an organization, and what it can mean for you personally is, you know, to me, having that level of appreciation is where you then can actually cut below the surface and get to someone feeling genuinely appreciated or respected or valued. The surface stuff we can all do. The surface stuff, everyone does it pretty well. But until you actually can say, hey, you know what? The fact that you grew up poor, and the fact that you are, you know, queer, or the fact that you were raised in a single parent household, or the fact that you, you know, you volunteer at your church, whatever it is, getting to an understanding of how those aspects of identity can actually influence and like how they shape us, and how that mixture of people on your team, that's when I think if you have that, that's when you get to that deeper level. And then it gets past the, yeah, of course I want, because Minnesotans, you know, I'm from California, like Minnesotans here, I can be genuinely like, how's the weather? It's going to be the weather in the weekend. That's what you're going to talk about, right? Like every day is going to be the weather in the weekend. Oh gosh, it's raining. What you got going this weekend? It's too soon to talk about the weekend because it's only Tuesday, but like, you know, that eventually comes, which is fine. But like, you know what? I want someone who can talk to me about, hey, you know what? I have such a deep relationship that I want to actually share with you that right now I'm in turmoil because this Roe v. Wade is weighing down on me, and I'm worried about the individual liberties. And because I've built up a relationship and I know about, I can share that in a space with you. Now, leaders who can do that, I guarantee you the trust on your team and what you add, that team will do for you. Imagine that, right? Imagine being able to have that, but we're not, leaders aren't ready to have that conversation. Leaders they're going to touch that with 1,000-foot pole, most leaders. Why? Because they're scared of it.
Well, and this brings me to the next question. And by the way, I hope we heard exactly what the message was. We got to stop being surface level and we need to go deep. But you know what happens when we go deep? More accountable, more work. People are afraid, especially leaders, to go deep. Which brings me to this question. Do you believe it's important for leaders to know what's going on in the lives of their employees outside of work?
You're setting me up on this question. I personally do, but I think there is, you know, Glenn, I think as you framed up your work and you framed up how you think about these aspects of individuality, I don't know how you can ask that question without, you know, automatically, you know, I think everything you're pointing towards is an astounding yes of there's aspects of who I am. And I think what's the tough part, the shift you keep talking about, is you still have very much, you know, we'll call it the old guard of the ways of doing business and the ways of working, where work and personal life, there was a strict boundary. There's a strict, and some of it's generational, some of it's corporate versus non-corporate, but there's very much always been this line. You ask your grandparents, your great grandparents, whoever they were, they didn't talk about some of this stuff. And that line has shifted, right? I think it's clear that line continues to shift. I think the question is, why are you doing it? What's the purpose behind it? What is that supposed to unlock with your team? But yeah, I absolutely think people should be in. Now, I think the question is, what steps are leaders ready to take, right? And so the baby step, I got a 7-month-old at home. That's an easy one. You can talk to me about my 7-month-old all day, every day. I'll show you pictures right now, right? But then you get to these trickier topics, like what are my views about, politics? What are my views on religion? What are my views on some of these bigger things? And, you got to be thoughtful about how you engage as a leader in those topics, because they still are tricky. They come fraught with issues if you don't know how to navigate conflict, if you don't know how to navigate disagreement, if you don't know how to navigate contrary views. But I don't know, I personally would much rather be on a team and have a leader who had the relationship where we could foster that kind of discussion within my own personal boundaries, just because I'd be more committed. I just think the level of engagement, commitment, that relationship would be so much deeper that you would get more out of me than anybody else who in a similar situation.
There you go. Depth. Depth. By the way, you actually took it to a whole other level when you said politics, right? How about just people taking the time to even know who you are? Like, who are you? Like, what do you like? Take it beyond just work. Just like I talked about, Guillermo, my firm's director of marketing and strategy. He loves surfing. He loves meditating. We talk about those things. Do we talk about politics? Sometimes, but the point is that we go to where it's comfortable for people, but it goes beyond just work. Because right now people are consumed with so many external forces. And by the way, before we go to the next question, I'll make sure that we recognize that part of this move from standardization to personalization is finding the right balance, right? Because remember, one thing that we've done a great job of historically, I'm trying to be funny here, is benchmarking everybody. I actually don't believe in that when it comes to people, because you can't benchmark what other people are doing, because every organization has a different set of individuals. But yet, because that name of the company did it, we need to do it. And what do? We keep bringing in the same old standards, repeating them, and we celebrate them because everybody is doing them, because they are in the board report. They're in the annual review. You see my point? We could have interrupted and then pivoted. Just food for thought. So Courtney's shared, so well articulated who you let in and how you see them. See how it can get complicated? And we're just talking about the first two. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about who you let people be, who you let them be. So should leaders encourage their employees to limit the details that they share? Different kind of question. Share about their personal lives to protect their careers and advancement opportunities within the organization. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, well, I think, and I'm glad I got Andy and Megan in the crowd, and I know them pretty well. And I think what you'll see is, if the question is, should you stop people from actually sharing parts of themselves to help protect them in the long term? Organizations, and I think, I can be candid and say that they came through an organization that was very much, probably they felt when they came in, they probably tell you, they probably protected aspects of them. So I think Andy even just kind of mentioned it, like you did it to make sure that you were thought of as part of the team, that you were the mold for that right next job, because it all mattered what job you had next and how job you had next. But just think about it. Is that the way you want people in your organization? Like back to Andy's point, you hire for people to bring this level of diversity or their identity to the table, and then immediately you suppress it, right? Like, does that sound like I don't think anybody would tell you that sounds like the right answer. I think the question you get to though is, Glenn, I think you have these really big ideas about how people can show up and live this individuality. And the tension always is going to be, how do you make sure that you create environments where people that isn't taken advantage of, where there is that trust, where there is that way, because you can show up and you can ask someone to be there, but then if you hold it against them, right, or if that piece of it is used against you, it can be, you know, just think about the negativity. You can think about the impact that has on the individual. Like that is hurtful, right? And so I think we're always in this kind of like, how do I get there? How do I engage? How do I let people live that? But how do you also train organizations through systems and mechanisms and processes to make sure that that stuff isn't being held against? Because I can't tell, I don't know who's out there, but I tell you, a lot of corporations, and I'm not talking mills, there's a lot of companies that will be held against you like that, right? And that will be something you got to be thoughtful about. So I agree with you. I think it's where we want to get to. I think the question is, what's the right way to get there? So.
My goodness. You went back and validated why you believe it's both the individual and the environment with that answer. That was powerful, man. That was powerful. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do we help leaders understand this when, for most of them, when I'm talking about senior executives, C-suite folks, I'll give you an opinion. I'd love to get yours. I actually feel that we're using conversations as a cop-out. But just keep talking. By the way, I'm all about conversations, but there comes a point where we need to move beyond conversations to actions. What are the opportunities here for them? I mean, because there really is opportunities, right? I mean, because they could play the part or they actually can do something about it. This is an opportunity to reinvent themselves by just making some simple pivots. What do you think?
Well, I'd also like to open it back. I love that the crowd interaction has been
Sure.
great for me. So I'd love to hear what the crowd is thinking on this
You're
one.
now really facilitating this thing now. So you go. Go ahead.
I don't know. I'd love to hear what folks think. Like, what is it? You know, how can leaders? You know, and there's also, I just have to make a plug for a great organization in the Twin Cities, YWCA, and they've had this time to talk. You know, for probably almost 20 years, and they'd moved years ago to time to act, right? Because I think you're also that piece of like, we can talk. There's a lot of talk going on, but what does action look like? And I'd love to hear, what does action look like for leaders?
Facilitate the room. Go ahead.
All right. So anybody?
Can you clarify the question a little bit?
You
want
want-
to know what action looks like?
Yeah, you want to, Glenn, you mind repeating that one last time?
It's just that I said that I believe that senior executives are using conversations as a crutch. And that we need to move beyond just talking to creating action. And whether they know this or not, this is the biggest opportunity they have to make fundamental pivots to reinvent themselves and earn trust.
I have a suggestion as a start for a senior leader is to acknowledge that there is a problem.
Nice.
I was like, start there.
Nice.
And express dissatisfaction with the current status quo. Like even just saying, yep, this is not working. I'm not satisfied with it. Here's why I'm not. And then following it up with, here's what I will personally do, and then report back on whether or not they did those things. And then if they didn't, admit that that was not good enough, and that they'll try harder and just keep doing it over and over again. So for me, it's acknowledge that there is a problem, is what I would love for senior leaders to start with.
It's your show. That's one.
Todd?
Oh. I've been waiting patient for this one, sorry. I'm gonna hopefully stitch a couple things together, and I think it really plays up. I don't know the name, I'm sorry.
I'm Megan.
Megan, Todd.
Hi, Todd.
We'll be, here's what I would say. I think in addition to that, I loved your point that you made about making a bet on the uniformity of not being individual. Those bets that were made, it's not just understanding there's a problem, that is no longer applicable. It wasn't wrong potentially when they went there, but it maybe is no longer applicable.
You know why? Because back then it was okay because things were predictable and now they're not. Keep
Correct.
going.
Yep. And so when we think about things, and I love Courtney's statement or the conversation about the uniform, that's really important.
Because what I tend to find is that people struggle with the idea of saying, help me understand what the systemic issues are. And they're actually systemic microaggressions that sit in that space. And I think understanding and acknowledging that what had worked previously no longer is applicable or no longer works, it's what allows for the conversation about return to work to say, we need to do what's right for the employee versus what I did 30, 40 years ago, where I was guided to, you're the first one in, you turn the lights on, you turn the lights off. Right? And I played that and I did that for a number of years, right? And in today's world, that just plays a very different role. But that's what the guidance I was given to ascend up whatever the ladder was, or those things that were existing out there. And so I think it's about understanding that we're living in a set of systems, right? Understanding that what had worked previously may no longer be applicable. And I think that reflection and realization is step one in that journey for that change and reinvestment that you say in a leader's own self.
Thank you. And by the way, these same principles, these same indicators of individuality, they apply to how we serve our customers too. Our vendors.
So can I amplify? So current customer, the current employee, the current member of society thinks that corporations need to be a little more responsible in general, not just inside the doors of the company, but into the society in which they operate. And so clearly here in the Twin Cities, we've heard the performative conversation since George Floyd and all the other things that happened in the last 2 years. And I've heard a lot of companies make a lot of statements about, oh, this and oh, that, but I haven't seen, right? So if you're going to make statements about we need social change, and your employees and your customers are expecting you to show that, then I live on the north side of Minneapolis. Where are the gas stations? Where are the coffee shops? Where are the stores? Where are the manufacturing locations where the people don't have to transport themselves an hour and a half by bus to get to work because the work's where they live? So instead of making performative statements on how we're going to change everything, I want to see some performative action. And that is what happens inside the company, and it needs to happen outside the company too.
Why do you think it isn't happening, Steve?
Because it's easy to make statements in the marketing departments and the PR firms, and it's a lot harder to invest real dollars in real people's lives. So I will call it out. I've read in the paper recently, there's a $2 billion initiative happening in the Twin Cities where a major bank and a few other major corporations, foundations, are stepping up and putting real dollars into the situations. Now, that's dollars commitment. I like to see those dollars, of course, in action. But this stuff costs money. If you want to engage your employees, don't do it on the cheap.
Steve, let me just jump in.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
go.
go, no, because let me just sizzle right through this. They can make all the commitments to dollars, but will they solve for the right thing?
Ask the community what they.
But does the community even know? Because we're blindsided by the fact that we're A, suppressed, B, not knowing what's right, because knowing something's right isn't enough to start doing what's right, and knowing something's wrong isn't enough to stop doing it. My point is, I'm concerned that we'll invest all these dollars on solving for the wrong thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna go real quick. So Steve I think there's a fundamental tension that you will always have, that corporations were never going to solve these problems at the root causes. I think that's just the nature of corporations. Corporations are accountable to shareholders, one and only. And they will have a vested interest in all of society, because if you believe in what the purpose of a corporation is, it actually is to serve broader society, right? That is why we've created businesses. That's why we have commerce, right? But I think the piece that we always got to keep in mind, and I struggle with, is that, if you take the north side, if you just took the north side, you took the wealth gap in the north side alone, that is $1 billion wealth gap. That is not a $1 million, it is $1 billion wealth. Like, we sometimes forget about the size, magnitude, and historical legacy of the problem we're trying to solve. but I don't think there's any way that we're ever going to solve it unless we have every stakeholder at the table genuinely committed to change. And I actually don't think most of them are genuine in that commitment. So like, I do think that is a reality. I don't think you solve it without corporations, but I think if anyone is hoping that corporations are going to solve the societal issues that we have, you were going to be waiting for you're going to be waiting for a long time. And so I think we got to figure out what that role is. I think we got to figure out accountability. I've been having you've seen more shareholder activism in this space where people want actual racial equity audits of saying you pledged $200 million, wherever my shareholders want me now to tell me, what have you done with that $200 million? But I think we never can underestimate the size, magnitude, and complexity of the work. And especially corporations are not good at centering the people who actually want, or the ones who need to solve for, right? Like we do not do a good job of that. We do a good job of our consumers, but we don't necessarily do a good job of knowing and understanding what community needs. And so I think it's all fair points, but that's my take. And I will tell you, like, for instance, the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, right? NBCRE, right? It's a coalition of companies who we always feel better when we're together. But I'll be honest, I've been on the ground floor, and you know what? There are people genuinely wanting to create change, very much. But even creating that change, it's like it takes time, man, and it takes like, are we solving the right problems? I don't, maybe not, and so there's all these pieces to that puzzle. And we're coming up on George, the 2-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And I was telling some people today, I'm like, I don't know about everybody, but I'm like, I'll speak for me as a Black person. I'm tired of hearing about statements. I don't even want to say that. We have to say something. We're going to say something. I'm tired of talking about it. You know why? Because I look back 2 years. I don't, there's another probably report coming out any day about the Minneapolis Police Department will make you lose hope that anything's actually gotten any kind of bit better, right? And so like, there's that reality, and that is, I guess that's my individuality too. So I'll stop before I get myself in too much trouble. This is on YouTube.
So
We have a question here. A comment, yes, please.
We've gone there.
I'll come back to you, Tom.
I'm going to be, I don't, okay. We'll make it official. I'm going to be a little optimistic on the corporation solving societal issues. I've done quite a bit of work globally, and way back in the day, I'm not going to date myself, but way back in the day, in college, I thought I was going to go into nonprofit, wanted to save the world, and all that. And then I quickly realized when I had done an internship for the World Bank and some of these other countries, and now subsequently, from years of doing work with corporations globally, that if you show up as a titan of commerce in another country, the heads of state will listen. Whereas where you watch some of these NGOs go in, no one pays attention. But again, the corporations go in and the heads of state perk up. And they can impact some of these societal issues. And I really think that, and I firmly believe that as corporations, those of us that are in them, we really need to step up to the game because we are titans of commerce and we really can make a difference. So I think we need to wear that hat and own it and say, we have the dollars, let's make a difference here. Let's really think about what we can do to change. So that's always been my hope. That's my optimism. I see some corporations that do it better than others, and I hope we can all do it, right?
Now, Tesla, I'd say to that point, one of my reasons of diversity, equity, inclusion in this work, I fundamentally believe if the Fortune 500 were at 250 female CEOs, or that was, call it 35, 40% BIPOC CEOs, that corporations would be much more responsible citizens on earth. I fundamentally believe diversity at that level would drive different outcomes from the corporate community. And if we could achieve that, I think there's something about lived experience that helps you understand and act differently in those situations. And I agree with you. I do definitely agree. But I think that would be the step. I think we could do that and diversify those who run the companies. I think we probably see different outcomes.
I would agree with that.
So let's go to the next question. Let's go now to indicator number 3, who you let them be. And by the way, Andy, I'm going to ask according to this question, but I'd love for you to get involved in this conversation, please. What can organizations do to ensure that employees don't feel pressured to assimilate to meet someone else's standards and expectations to the point where they can't feel like they can truly be their authentic self?
I love to hear what Andy has to say.
Boy,
Like that?
I like.
Um,
Want me to repeat the question? Give you a little time to think about it?
No, I mean, I feel pretty strongly about this in the sense of, again, going through my experiences of, if you truly want people to show up, you know, we go back to individual environment, is you've gotta have the environment where people show up and you don't change them for wanting them to be a certain way. You just take what as they come, and you really truly try and understand and meet them where they are. Versus, no, you need to meet me where I'm at, and this is the standard, right? Which again, words matter. There is no standard, right? It's truly believing that they're going to bring their best selves to work. And then if you see it, like we talked about a little bit earlier, if you see something where it's like, you feel the pull, you feel the standardization, how do you jump in and throw a grenade on that thing? And that's obviously being facetious, again, YouTube, of making sure that it doesn't manifest itself, and you truly start to like get those little pieces that just kind of come in, and it's little things that you may say, oh, hey, you might want to do it this way, you might want to do it. It's like, no, meet them where they are, no matter where they are, and you show up consistently that way. And in the sense of how you interact with people, is that's how you kind of leave that out there without people actually, or allowing others to try and bring standardization in, because standardization is very easy, right? It makes it easier because then there's expectation of, hey, this is how we show up, this is what we do. When you don't have that and you don't have that control, like it scares a lot of people, it makes them uncomfortable. I relish in that, in the fact that show up, that's who you are. And I think that is the most freeing thing possible, is when not only can I do that as a leader, but then my boss allows it, my boss's boss allows it, and not only do they allow it, they actually encourage it. And you just see them show up as who they are. Right, I'll give you a perfect example. We went to a more casual atmosphere probably 5 or 6 years ago. And the first day our CEO showed up in jeans, you could tell he was uncomfortable. And I think he probably got feedback of like, it doesn't feel genuine, it doesn't feel right. And then you saw him go back to what was more comfortable for him, but it didn't manifest itself in judging how anybody else was able to show up, right? And it's a small example of when you want this, you've got to allow people just to show up, and you've got to, like, again, meet them where they're at, but yourself also stay true to who you are.
Now, I think the one quick build, I think we, I think we're so, and this is why your book's so important. So I'm also going to sell you some books too. Is that I do think we, as a society, probably do a pretty poor job of understanding our own authenticity and our own self, right? So like, the question is, how do you make sure you allow someone to be their authentic self? Why? I think most people can't fully define what the authentic self actually is. Like, what is my authentic self? Like, you come into the corporation, you say, my authentic self doesn't take notes. I've never liked to take notes. I'm like, all right, well, you better still send that email recap, because I don't care what your authentic self says. There's some modes of operation that have to be adhered to for us to move the business, right? Now, if you say my authentic self is actually, this is how I communicate big ideas, well, then that's something that is your part of your authenticity. Let's talk about that. Let's explore that. It's how to make sure that piece of yourself can still be how you feel, how you communicate, even though we're going to probably try to tamper you down. We're probably going to try to get you to do it a certain way. So like that piece, though, we don't have that conversation. Like, authentic self isn't everything about who you are. Authentic self has to be, you have to figure that out. Like, what are those pieces that are authentically you and how you show up? And then also, we have to be honest, like, there are always going to be pieces about operating within some kind of system that are going to require certain parts of it. Now, you said, is that my authentic self, right? Is that really authenticity? Like, I crack a lot of jokes. I personally, those who know me, like, I'm a very, like, kind of happy-go-lucky, easygoing guy. I'm like, I'm not too serious, but I can be very serious. But like, there are moments where I felt like people told me as a marketer, like, you know what, you're not serious enough. You're not, you know, I don't know if you're really in it. Are you really here to drive it? Like that came across. I'm like, well, this is who I like. That is my authenticity. I'm going to be the one who cracks the joke with my cross-functional team, but I also guarantee you we will be on time. I guarantee you that product is going to launch and be top tier. But you know, the way you do it, they want you to sometimes fit that mold. So.
Well, that was another great example of how that individual didn't know you. So let's move to indicator number 4, what you let them do. So Courtney, should leaders be more aware of and mindful of their employees' capacities to contribute to the organization's success in the employee's unique way, considering their blend of expertise, experience, and perspectives?
I think Alyssa Ryan would be great to take a first step at that question.
Love that.
Is it still Ryan? Did I get that wrong?
It's Ryan at work.
Okay.
It's Rivers outside of her.
Okay.
So great to see you again.
Yeah, I think that's,
So it's okay.
there we go. I think it's on now.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely, I guess is what I would say. I mean, I think, you know, I think about this not only for myself, but I think about it for others in the organization too. But I think about, you know, the moments in which I felt like, you know, what I do matters, right? And that kind of goes back, Glenn, to something you talked about earlier. You know, I think it was in those moments where I felt like I was uniquely positioned to be able to contribute in a certain way. And so I think helping people kind of understand their unique skill sets, right? And then really giving them the opportunities that really empower them to show up in ways that are maybe different and unique, or they're uniquely suited for. I think that can be so empowering for people. So I guess that, you know, maybe that's just an agreement, but I think the challenge sometimes can be identifying, you know, what those unique skill sets are, and really not necessarily as you see them, but how individuals see them. And I think for me, that was a journey to figure out, like, what are those things that are unique superpowers of mine? And I think, you know, for a long time, right, I thought about what those were in the context of what's made me successful within the confines of the structures that we had, right? And not necessarily on like what I could uniquely do outside of that. And so I think that's probably the journey that makes it the most difficult. But I think when you can align those things, it can be those career best opportunities. I think it allows people to show up in a way where they're truly appreciated and where they feel like their work really matters.
And Glenn is actually, I remember because we went through your course together. And so if you don't know Alyssa, she's like finance guru, MBA, like, you know, she does it all, but like she has a wicked creativity about her that you could tell, like, as we thought about and went through everything, like it felt like it's probably stifled. Like, how did that creativity showed up? And like, no one probably would have pegged you as like that deep level of creativity, because I thought it was a perfect, because like you and I think you figured out ways to bring it to life where you probably before just kind of had to let it, maybe it was like Etsy projects or like selling on the weekend, you know, like, but now like that's a valued part of like what you do now, you know. So
Courtney, looks like we got a little breaking news that there's some tornado warnings.
Oh, so should we get on the road?
So
what do we do? Do we go downstairs in the basement, or do we...
I think at least knowing where we should go if we hear a siren would be a good decision.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Thank you. So let's just tackle this last question here. So now we've gotten to who you let in, how you see them, who you let them be, what you let them do. Now, how you let them do it. How can leaders make employees feel encouraged to work and think in ways shaped by their cultural backgrounds, ethnicity, and or gender?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a step, and I'd love to hear from, I don't know, Frank or somebody else, or Todd or Steve, anybody who has thoughts on this. It's you know, I think we got to be always careful of like you, Hispanic individual or Latinx individual. I'd love for you to bring your cultural background to this project. You know, like it is not you know, the first piece is how do you actually do that, and how do you actually create that back to this environment question of where somebody can bring that. And some jobs candidly are going to be much easier if you're doing marketing communications or kind of things where you can pull on insights from those communities that you know best. That's always going to be a bit easier. I think the biggest piece of like what leaders can do is back to this first piece, is have a genuine appreciation for the value of that diversity and showcase it on a consistent basis in ways that allows people to bring that aspect of their identity to the table. Two, it's back to that psychological safety of like when someone throws out something that you're foreign, like it's like a foreign to you, like someone, you know, it's a piece that I've had to get, like when you remember you say like, oh, that's a weird name. There is no such thing as a weird name. There's no, it might be different for you, but like even that natural reaction, you have that reaction all the time. You have biases built in where you are going to have a gut reaction to say, oh my gosh, I don't get why, oh, what are you doing there? You have to figure out ways to check that. You have to figure out ways to bring that back, because that reaction, even quickly, that natural reaction will make a person say, well, oh, well, that's part of my heritage. And that's something just because you didn't know about it. Why are you reacting like that to me? All of a sudden, I'm never sharing that again with me, right? So that appreciation, that psychological safety, which involves checking some of that bias. And then I think what best leaders do is you experiment and you bring it in. So like, how do you actually showcase how you would do it? Or how do you bring those examples to the table? How do you celebrate those in various ways? And so those are probably the three most practical ways I can get to. So, but I'd love if anybody else does.
Yeah, basically, how should leaders encourage people to really show up and in how they work based upon their group identity?
Oh. Okay, I guess you're asking. Okay.
So yes, I think it definitely goes back, I think, to that psychological safety, but something I would add based on, something that you used was about background, or I sort of interpreted it like culture or something similar. Okay. So I had heard there's a theory called symphonic thinking. And the symphonic thinking is really about being multicultural, multidisciplined, multilingual, multidimensional. It's that multiness. And so when I think about that, I think that that's something that these backgrounds bring to the table. It's symphonic thinking, right? But it's something that they really have to recognize or believe when they're in the room, that they deserve to be there. They have that symphonic thinking. And really that's it. And then the room, to your point, Courtney, is you have to create that psychological safety where they really feel they can bring that, and that adds to the conversation.
So can you see, do you want to make a comment, Frank? You're good?
I'm just.
Okay, all right. Well, look, we're going to kind of close this before the tornado strikes, but notice how, all these 5 indicators require both the individual and the environment. Did you notice that? And how hard it is to actually navigate. But at least this is what I believe, something that can be measured. They're not just words on a model from a position paper. They're very fundamental words. So when you go back to work or with your friends or whomever you associate yourself with, start asking yourself, who are you letting in? How do you see them? Who do you let them be? What do you let them do? How do you let them do it? These things can be measured. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create an environment that allows people to be who they are. And we can start really practicing inclusion to the point where we can start appreciating the diversity that unfortunately I've seen in society for much too long viewed as tribalism. And that concerns me. And we can practice all these things for all these groups. And believe me, I'm proud to be Hispanic, but give me the room, but also give me the room to be me without consequences. And unfortunately, because these are things that can be uncomfortable for people, if they don't know how I want to show up, then we're actually putting them in an uncomfortable position. So we just have to be careful with these things as we're doing them, because there's a a broader audience out there that we have to be mindful of. And, I've often said that, what do they say? I forgot how it says. You got to have the house in order before you can do, anyway, I forgot, but we got to get our house in order. I mean, we should be the champions of change, meaning people of color. Because what I've learned is that those that are outside of this domain of POC, which most people don't even know what it means, by the way, they need to be part of it, because we all either fix this ourselves together, or it's going to be an us versus them environment. And if we do that, I think we're just hurting progress. And this isn't just domestically here in the United States, folks. This is everywhere. This is a global challenge that we're being faced with. And Courtney, I want to tell you something. Can we have just a little fun real quick, but we'll get a little deep too.
Yeah.
I want to let you know that when Courtney was preparing for this, he really wanted to show up for you guys. I mean, he's tired of the conference where everything's staged, scripted, safe. He wanted to be here for you tonight, and you were, and some. And I thank you for that, because these kinds of conversations, they can be like everybody else's, or they can be real ones that if they can impact one person one way, you don't know what you've done the next day to somebody. And so I really want to thank you, because when I first met Courtney, I thought, man, this young man's going places. And he's really grown up, and he's just getting started. And I really appreciate everything that you do along this topic. I appreciate you not being fearful to address the tough questions, but I think, you're the kind of leader that we need to help others do the same. So I really appreciate the time. Let's give him a hand. So guys, I think we met the timeline here. It is 8:02. Let's all be safe, but let's stay in touch, right? I mean, so what I like to do, if I may, is let's just go around the room real quick and maybe share what was something that you walked away with, or something that you were encouraged by. And you always inspire me. No, you do. You do. I mean, believe me, if we had more time, he can share his personal story and you'd be blown away. So tell us what's on your mind.
I appreciate that one, and thanks for inviting us. It's always good and always refreshing to me to kind of step back in and get away from the pressures of standardization and just truly show up and be myself. What I heard here tonight is obviously all of us kind of searching for that same kind of goal of just being able to show up and just be us. But then also as leaders showing up and allow others to be themselves as well. So, and for me, that's what I take away from this is, how do I continuously show up as a leader that inspires others to just show up and just be them and contribute freely. And then also remember that we're part of the group that leaves that legacy for the next generation to lead in a different way that we all grew up and we don't want to be like.
Powerful, Andy. Again, we all want the same things. Thank you, Andy. Megan.
Oh, there's so many. Thank you, Courtney. It's funny hearing that you wanted to show up for us. Like I was telling Andy, I was like, we got to make sure we go because I want to show up for Courtney. So it goes both ways. I think the key takeaway for me, because there's obviously a lot of struggle, but I think the moment to sprint is now. And just getting, you kind of got to refuel. And, when you work in corporate America, you can't refuel with standardization. You can only refuel with other people that, understand. And so for me, this is like a refueling moment. To sprint and not to just, trudge. I feel like I've been trudging, but I'm like, no, we need to be sprinting. Because I don't know, we may be at a spot where we need to go back to trudging, but right now we're sprinting. We need to make sure we have fuel.
So good. So if I can make little baby comments here. So let's move beyond just getting a little better, because that's what we've become comfortable with. It's awesome. Tesla.
I want to agree with a lot of professional points, but there's something that you said that made me realize that there's an area of opportunity for me personally in my personal life, and it has to do with personal relationships. You said that sometimes people don't, something about allowing people to see how they've evolved I think there's someone in my personal relationship within my family that has evolved and come a very long way, and I'm not sure I've given them credit for how they've evolved.
Well.
So thank you.
No, thank you. And by the way, it's very common. And unfortunately, my brother still hasn't updated how he sees my evolution. These things happen. And again, he has my best interest at heart. He just doesn't know how to express it. Todd.
Well, I want to thank you both. I want to thank you for your candor and just kind of sharing your story and always. I think what I took away was not just the individual and the environment, that's what I wrote down, but I think there's an air of accountability that I can play in helping leaders understand their role in being part of the change. Right, I think the way we show up is part of the equation, and authenticity and individuality. But I oftentimes hear leaders say, okay, what can I do? What should I do? I think I walk away with helping them understand the appreciation for how others show up as an unlock or an unleash. That's something that may also be at play.
Very good. Thank you, Todd. Very good. So is that the warning?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're heading downstairs, Sandy?
It's just a thunderstorm warning. So stay away from windows. 80 mile per hour winds till 8:30.
Steve, you want to add? Well, let me just say, if I could just, I want to play off of what Todd said really quick, if I do my little. We've created a lot of awareness. Right. 2 years of awareness. But leaders aren't educated of what is really at stake. And I think that it's important to know that, look, standardization is always going to be around. Our job is just to modernize it. And we need to help leaders understand how to do that. So that's my, Steve.
Analyzing my team, our staff.
Good.
I'm not, 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 people. I'm 5. We're a team of 5 people, and we lift a lot of mountains for 5 people. They realized that of the 5 of us, we're born on 4 different continents. So we bring a lot of diversity of perspective from within that team. And what I noticed, how we work with each other is very open and very honest and very familial. And that everyone brings all their pieces. And maybe the pet peeve I have occasionally is I heard people saying, I think I'm going outside my lane. And I haven't responded to them physically this way, verbally this way, but my thought is, no, you're not going out of your lane. Particularly as a small team, we're all in everybody's lane.
That's right.
And so just reflecting on the way we operate and kind of happy, proud that we're operating.
There's a siren.
That's a tornado siren. I do think we should go down to the lower level.
Okay.
We go now.
Well, for all of you online, we want to thank you very much. Thank you 3M for sponsoring tonight's event. Thank you, Courtney Schroeder from General Mills, Director of Global Inclusion. And on behalf of GLLG and our organization, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. Thanks again. We'll continue the conversation. Have a good evening. Thank you.